Hello, everybody. Thank you all for coming. My name is TJ Poor. I'm the Director of Efficiency and Energy Resources at the Department of Public Service. Welcome to the Northern Vermont Regional Forum gathering for the purposes of input on the state's comprehensive energy plan. Every 6 years, the department updates the comprehensive energy plan that is outlining our energy vision for Vermont. And in developing the plan, we recognize that we're not the only entity doing planning for our energy future at Vermont. So this is the second of 4 regional forums to hear regional planning commissions and municipal energy planners regarding the issues and challenges associated with their energy planning and implementing the state's energy plan. I'm really excited for these forums. You all are much closer to seeing the on-the-ground implementation challenges as we look ahead the next 5-10 years, and then even out to 2050 for a long-term energy future. So we have with us Cindy Cook from Adamant Accord and Dave Lamont, working with Cindy as our facilitators for today's meeting, as well as a whole team from the Department of Public Service here to first and foremost to listen to your input, but also to help with meeting logistics and answer questions that you or the people in the audience may have. So you may see them throughout the course of the meeting. And I'll now turn it over to Cindy to provide the roadmap for today. Cindy, over to you.
Thanks, TJ. So if we could go to the next slide, please, Edward. So here we are. I've been up. Thanks. So I want to go over both forum etiquette and Zoom logistics. First off, the logistics. If you aren't speaking and you're not muted, please mute yourself. It'll help with the quality of the experience for everybody. And similarly, if you're please turn your video off, except when you're about to speak, or so that again the quality will be better for everybody. As you probably saw when you came on, that this meeting is being recorded and it will be posted on the department's website. So just be aware that that's happening. See, if you have questions or comments, please use the raise hand function. And so we're going to save questions till the end of the presentations, and we'll go over that in the agenda in just a moment. There'll be an opportunity for discussion and then public comments. We're specifically asking for, or we'll get presentations from the regional planning commissions, and then we'll be asking for municipal officials, planning commission members, energy committee folks, and other government officials to speak to questions that we'll foreshadow for you in just a moment. And I think that about covers it. In terms of etiquette, please be concise. Again, please use the chat function, and if you have comments that may or may not need to be shared with everybody. And if you want to get in the queue for commenting, please use the raise hand function, which is down in the reactions section at the bottom of your screen. I just want to ask you, is there anybody here that's joining us by phone rather than on the Zoom video app? Philip, do you know?
Not that I see. I don't see anyone who is exclusively joining us by phone. Okay,
great. Thanks. So let's see. So next slide, please. So the agenda, we're at the 4:10 slot here, reviewing the agenda, et cetera. We're about to hear an overview of the comprehensive energy plan development process from the department, and TJ will lead that. Then there'll be an opportunity for informational questions about the plan development process. And we want to keep them to just that at this point. We'll get into the substance later, but this is just a chance to ask questions about the mechanics of what the process will look like going forward. After that, we'll ask the regional planning commissions, or they will do presentations. There'll be 3 presentations. At the end of those presentations, there'll again be an opportunity for informational questions. We'll be asking municipal officials to provide input, and we'll have a conversation between regional folks, the municipal folks, and the department and others. And there'll be an opportunity for public comment before we wrap up with an explanation of what's going to happen next and future opportunities for input. And we'll finish up by 6 o'clock. Any questions or comments about that? If you have some, could you chat or raise your hand?
Penny Jones has raised her hand.
Yep, Penny.
This is Penny Jones, and you noted in the agenda the municipality input is at 5:15. I am the manager for the Village of Morrisville Water and Light Department. Unfortunately, I do need to leave at 5:15 due to a village trustee meeting, and I just wanted to make you aware of that.
Okay. Any workarounds that we see on that? How do you have particular comments that you know you want to make now, Penny? I mean, I'm not asking you to make them now. I'm just
No, I'm not aware of any comments I need to make at this point in time.
okay. If you become aware of them, if you signal that in chat, that would be helpful, and we'll try to squeeze you in or come up with another way that your comments can be heard. So, because we definitely want to hear from everybody. So, thanks for raising that. Any other issues, questions before we get started? So next slide, please. And I'm passing it over to TJ.
All right, thanks, Cindy. So really to ensure a common understanding of the comprehensive energy plan and this year's process, I'm going to describe really what it is, the basis for its development, and the process going forward. And I always like to start discussions of the energy plan, reminding people that there's portions of guidance littered throughout statute that direct us on our energy policy, but it's really explicitly laid out in statute in 30 VSA 202A what our energy policy is. And this slide lays out some of the fundamental pillars of the policy, which include affordability, reliability, sustainability, and then meeting our needs in a way that's environmentally sound and a manner that'll meet our greenhouse gas reduction requirements. And as you can imagine, the goals can at times be competing, and the department in the development of the plan gathers input to try and help balance these objectives and forge a path forward. Next slide, Ed. So the comprehensive energy plan itself is actually two plans. For many years, the requirement was just an electric plan, how you meet the needs of reliable electric service at least cost. But in the last 10 to 15 years or so, the requirement, the effort has been expanded to be much more comprehensive, expanded to other sectors, transportation, thermal, and to be a plan that meets all of our energy needs. And it's required now every 6 years. The next one is due in January. Next slide, please. Within the scope of our statutory guidance, there are certain requirements that the CEP must address. I mentioned the greenhouse gas reduction requirements. They're set in statute by the Global Warming Solutions Act, which I'll get to in a little more detail later. But perhaps more importantly for this meeting, the energy plan must also include standards and recommendations for an enhanced energy planning. Most here will be familiar with Act 174, which required that enhanced energy planning for local levels of government. Next slide, please. So our last CEP in 2016, 5.5 years ago already, many of you will be familiar with the overarching vision that it set and goal that it set of 90% renewable energy supply across all sectors by 2050. And it also included over 300 recommendations scattered throughout the 300-page document in order to push the state in the direction of that objective. So that is one of our starting points, 90% renewable by 2050. And also the greenhouse gas requirements. It's the Global Warming Solutions Act memorialize these in 10 VSA 578 to have reductions relative to both 2005 levels in 2025 and 1990 levels in 2030 and 2050, but real targets. And it also established a climate council I'll talk about in more detail in a minute here as well, and the interaction between the two plans. Next slide, please. I'll talk about it now, actually. So the Global Warming Solutions Act created a 23-member council, climate council, that's going to develop a climate action plan by December of this year. And so that climate action plan is tasked with developing climate mitigation and adaptation actions. And the comprehensive energy plan is not a climate change plan. So that we have two different reports, two different requirements, but one really doesn't obviate the need for the other. They will need to, and actually they're required to, interact and inform one another. So on this slide, you can see the broad areas of overlap for the energy plan and the action plan. Greenhouse gas requirements, energy sector analysis, public engagement efforts, and a focus on equitable solutions are all required by both plans. We're coordinating really closely with the Climate Action Plan and the Climate Council, I should say, on all these areas. On the left side of the slide, you can see some other areas that the Climate Action Plan are responsible for, some of the non-energy greenhouse gas emissions, looking at forest sequestration, carbon sequestration, I should say, and reviewing our greenhouse gas inventory. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see some of the other things that the Comprehensive Energy Plan are responsible for that I've talked about a little bit. The last thing I'll say is really that the energy plan is really, it's consistent with and a key component of meeting our state's greenhouse gas requirements, and it will reflect some planning and some impacts of climate change on the energy system. But again, it's really not a climate change plan. It's not a comprehensive look at Vermont's non-energy related greenhouse gas emissions or climate adaptation needs. Instead, it's a strategic vision and interpretation of broad energy challenges and opportunities. And so it points state energy policy in a direction, and it should lay out how we make decisions given the best information and analysis available to us. Next slide. And so that's really the vision for the 2022 Comprehensive Energy Plan, that it's focused on a strategic plan where we describe how the state thinks about trade-offs among policies, how we value costs and benefits, and analyzing what's a good policy for Vermont, and then how we apply that. And in that process, to consider more explicitly milestones. For example, when is a policy or a program no longer likely to be effective? How will we know? Like, for example, if all vehicle manufacturers are no longer making electric vehicles in 2035, does the state still need to offer incentives for the purchase of new electric vehicles? Maybe, but we need to just set up a structure so we know how we want to evaluate that, and then we can make those decisions at the time. We want the plan to be essentially, we want it to be robust in the face of uncertainty. For example, in the face of a global pandemic, how adaptable is our plan? The plan is also going to include, as I mentioned, Act 174 standards and recommendations, climate and renewable energy pathways. How are we going to get to our goals, or how could we get to our goals? And it also will, as usual, include the state's state agency energy plan, which is the state's lead by example plan for state government operations, and of course the electric plan, as I mentioned earlier. Next slide. So we're doing some quantitative analysis to support the plan as well. We're using the low emissions analysis platform developed by the Stockholm Environment Institute to model both a business as usual scenario, what will happen if we do nothing, and what's that look like, and then also some mitigation pathways. And so we can see the delta between those and the incremental reductions that we need to meet our targets. It'll also estimate the costs associated with those. So we'll be able to develop policies and pathways that will help meet us and actually put cost to that to help us evaluate kind of what things we want to prioritize and evaluate some of the trade-offs between policies. What LEAP doesn't do is some of those non-energy benefits and costs of different policies. Those have to be applied exogenously, so separately. One of the benefits of LEAP last time around, the last energy plan, you may remember we did a total energy study. We used a really great model. It was called the Times-Markel model, and did a similar modeling effort, business as usual and pathways. How do we get to 90% by 2050? And had some really excellent analysis. Unfortunately, that model was a bit of a black box, and we weren't able to kind of extract the inputs and understand the outputs and how the model worked really well without consultant help. One of the benefits of LEAP is that both the Department of Public Service and Agency of Natural Resources will be trained on how to use it. We'll be able to license it for a very low cost, and we can then use it going forward. And as some of you on the call are aware, LEAP was used after the total energy study and the energy plan last time. LEAP was used for some regional modeling. We're hoping to do a statewide analysis this summer, and then late summer, early fall, start to break down into subregions all of that data from LEAP. And we'll have the consultant to help us do that, and then we'll have staff trained to help run the model, so we can actually have the modeling and analysis by subregion. Next slide, please. And so the tentative timeline here, this is actually of a week ago, and one thing I think has already changed. So right now we're in the June time frame with the regional forums. We're planning some stakeholder groups that are more likely to happen in July, I think now, maybe late June, but probably July, to focus on sector policies and pathways, and to really understand some of those trade-offs I talked about. Looking for the final modeling to be complete in the August timeframe, with a draft energy plan in September with hearings throughout. And then you can see that bar on the bottom, and we really are looking to coordinate closely with the stakeholder engagement and the timing of the Climate Council. We don't want to engage the public and ask 80% of the same people 80% of the same questions, and kind of really confuse the issue or suck people's time when it's really limited right now, especially. And so we're operating in as close a coordination we can, given our respective charges with the action plan and the energy plan. And with that, I think that's all I had. Cindy.
Great, thanks, TJ. So if you have informational questions for TJ that you haven't already included in the chat, please do so now or raise your hand. And again, I want to check, Philip, did anybody join us by telephone since we last checked in on that?
Nope, everyone is joining us using the program.
Great. So do we have any questions on chat or any raised hands?
There was a question which you answered, asking if these slides will be available electronically. And yes, both the slides are online now, and that link, the website link, is in the chat. And then we'll add the video by Friday. And there was a question from, I think, Jock Gill, if there's anyone from GMP attending. And I don't see anyone who's identified themselves as a Green Mountain Power representative, but there could be.
So I'll give you all a moment to type in questions in chat if you have them. While we're giving people a moment, if you haven't already done so and you'd like to sort of introduce yourself in terms of who you represent, please do that in chat.
And there's one question. It was really a comment from Jock.
People have already done that, but it's always nice to know who's in the room, so to speak.
There was a comment earlier from Jock asking about community solar and how to reduce barriers to community solar, especially for 500 kilowatt arrays. So it's a comment. I don't know if it needs a question and answer, but
let's take that later in the session, because right now we're just wanting to focus on the process of the plan development. But we also want to make sure that gets captured, that there's interest in solar and how to make it more feasible. Okay, so Thomas, you have a question? Can you unmute yourself?
That was, so Thomas is based on
Oh, I'm sorry.
his chat, Thomas is actually Jock. I think he's borrowing a Zoom account, and
Yeah.
that was the question concerning community solar.
Okay, great. So any other questions before we move on? Okay, so let's see, let me get this. Let's move to the next slide. Edward? Can we move to the next slide? There we go. So I want to give you a heads up that some of the questions that the department is particularly interested in, particularly from regional and local folks, is what's most important for the state to include in the plan to support regional and municipal energy planning. The second is how can the standards and recommendations for developing municipal plans be improved? And third, what recommendations from regional and municipal energy plans should the department actively consider as it updates the plan? Things to be thinking about as you're listening to the regional presentations, which are about to begin. So let's move on to the next slide. And so now we're going to start the first of 3 regional planning presentations. And again, I ask that you type in questions or comments, and we'll take all those after the third presentation. But first up is Allison Lowe with NVDA, Northeast Vermont Development Association. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Allison.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Just want to make sure. Yep, good. Okay, we can move to the next slide. Just some key takeaways from our 2018 plan. Obviously, transportation represents the biggest slice of the pie, about 38% of our energy use, followed closely by residential heating. That's for space and water. Our plan seeks to make alternative fossil fuels more affordable to our region, seeing that energy burden is high in the region, and reducing reliance on single occupancy vehicle trips. We also have a strong focus on integrating efficiency and weatherization into our energy strategies. We set a broad goal of weatherizing 25% of the region's housing stock by 2020, which we did not meet. However, we made valiant strides towards it. Obviously, we wanted to include broad participation and consideration of environmental aesthetic impacts when considering renewable energy development. And finally, our region has a very strong and thriving local food system. And we wanted to remind people that those have energy impacts as well. So we have a section on a closed loop system and how it can reduce our carbon footprint. So the next slide. Some of our key policies, what is unique about our region, while Vermont is a net importer, we are a net exporter. We produce a considerable amount of energy in Caledonia, Essex, and Orleans, some of the 3 least populated counties in the state. And so we actually have a policy on citing that we won't support an energy project that simply cannibalizes off an existing project. In other words, if it's going to cause or exacerbate grid congestion and force some of the larger generators that are already there to curtail, we're not going to support it unless the developers can work to find ways either with storage or directing the generation away from the hours when it's more likely to exceed load. We do touch on beneficial electrification, working with the the service providers to promote fuel switching. I think our subsequent updates to the plan will place a stronger emphasis on that. We also have a policy on installing charging stations in places where are compact centers of development, places where people can stop and shop and go to work. And that's important to remember to make sure that the downtowns and village centers are continue to be served well when we switch to electrified vehicles. We also want to partner with our electric efficiency utilities to find ways to better weatherize our housing stock and in our commercial building stock. And as we've seen during the pandemic, better telecommunications goes a long ways towards reducing our reliance on automobiles. So we don't have great coverage in the most rural region of Vermont, so we will continue to advocate for better telecommunications. Regarding transportation, I think the outreach to our communities, what we're seeing in community surveys, is that there's a continued hesitancy to switch over to electric vehicles. That's changing somewhat, but we have lingering concerns over range anxiety. According to the census on census data based on W-2 forms, for example, as you see in this chart, we have some of the longest commutes in the state. People travel longer distances to work. They also travel greater distances for incidental things like shopping and errands. And so that contributes to their range anxiety. We also have a rougher terrain, a lot of dirt roads, a lot of areas that are harder to reach. So we have a reliance on vehicles that are higher up off the ground, particularly during mud season. And we have a greater share of energy burden. And I think that there are some lingering concerns over cost of EVs. It's not to discredit the cost efficiency of electric vehicles, but it's more that switching to electric vehicles still entails buying a new car. And since energy burden is a function of income, not of energy costs, I mean, that's a major outlay for a household that has low income. Next slide. Other transportation considerations, when we think of transit, we typically think of fixed line transit, bus lines, and we do have some fixed line transit that is well used, but it certainly doesn't serve every community in our region. And I would like to see communities that are more encouraged to think about transportation or transit in more creative ways, such as microtransit. Rather than simply conclude that transit is not, or transportation alternatives are not relevant in their community. And again, our reliance on telecommunications infrastructure it needs to improve, and our strategies should include building out that capacity while we're working on reducing our reliance on automobiles, not just for teleworking, but for telehealth and for commerce, and also better infrastructure for the charging in our vehicles in areas where it requires fast charge or some form of payment. That telecommunications network needs to coincide with that. Also, our recommendations for EV charging site prioritization, while we were writing this, it slightly predated VTrans's guidance for site prioritization. We want to make sure that we don't lose sight of our downtowns and village centers. Park and ride stations, for example, are not always conveniently located directly inside a downtown or a village center. So it's important that some of the fast charge opportunities are still in places where people can support local businesses. Next slide. Our thermal considerations, I think that our estimates for heating and energy use are probably the weakest link. And that's because our data sources are pretty thin. We rely heavily on American Community Survey, a sampling of uses, and also we have a high reliance on cordwood. So I don't think that we have the best estimates for usage or cost when it comes to thermal energy use. As I pointed out before, the Efficiency Vermont study released last year does show that our energy burden rates are the highest in the state. Most of our communities are over 14% of cost. And energy burden, again, is a function of income, not of energy costs. So even if they're heating with cordwood, they're going to be spending more on energy. Last year, we had a symposium on net positive housing, looking at siting new affordable net positive housing in a variety of settings, including rural areas as well as downtowns, and possibly for brownfield redevelopment. We went ahead to made a pitch at EAN to see if maybe that idea would go forward, and it didn't. However, the St. Johnsbury is now working with the Northern Forest Center on an affordable housing project that incorporates many of the ideas that were explored in that symposium. And while it's not necessarily net positive housing, it's certainly a move in the right direction. And we'd like to see more of those kinds of developments. We do have a very high concentration of older building stock, not just houses, but also community facilities. The majority, they tend to be higher concentration in downtowns and in village centers. And I think it's an important consideration going forward, because if we want to be able to preserve our traditional patterns of development in those, the downtowns and the village centers, we need to be sensitive of that context. We need to have a focus on that's concentrated not just on weatherization of residential units, but adaptation of community facilities. For example, I'm working with one community facility right now that's on the National Register that has tremendous potential for the region as a community center, and it is currently insulated with vermiculite. So, that's an important consideration. Fortunately, we have a tremendous partnership with Heat Squad. We're fortunate to have them in our region since 2018. They expanded here through a Northern Border Regional Commission grant. In 2020, even though we had significant restrictions at the beginning of the year because of social distancing, they still were able to complete 127 audits. We don't know the totals for the audit in the region yet, but we would expect Heat Squad to account for possibly about 65 to 75% of audits in the region. They have, as you can see from this chart here, they have about a 55% conversion rate of the 322 audits. It resulted in 178 projects, and nearly half of those projects were serving households that were less than 120% of the area median income. So they're low and moderate income households. Also, I think we need to find similar ways that to strengthen our ties to the commercial and industrial sectors. While Heat Squad has been a great resource for the residential sector, we need to forge a similar partnership. Next slide. So what we're finding, particularly, we set ambitious goals, but I think technology is catching up. I think that EVs are going to happen in the Northeast Kingdom. It might be a little slower than in other regions because of the factors that I outlined. I also think that we can reduce our reliance on automobiles. And I think the pandemic actually showed us a different way to do it. It certainly wasn't the crisis that we asked for, but I think that people will be working differently going forward. In the community surveys that we've been doing, we have been hearing that at least about a third of those who are in the workforce intend to continue to telecommute in some capacity. So I don't think that our vehicle miles traveled baseline of 14,000 miles per year is going to be relevant anymore. Going forward, I think that our plans really need to focus on load management, storage, and more targeted strategies for beneficial electrification. I think we would look to partners to find some better ways of identifying targets for beneficial electrification. For example, like how many EVs would it take to help to alleviate some of the grid congestion and build load in the Northeast Kingdom? So those, I think we need to be more strategic about it. We mentioned beneficial electrification, but in our subsequent updates to our plan, we need to be able to quantify those strategies. So that's it.
Great. Thank you, Allison. So next up is the Lamoille County Planning Commission, represented by Megan Rader. I hope I pronounced your name right, or Rodier. Sorry about that, Megan.
It's okay.
So I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Megan Rodier with the Lamoille County Planning Commission, regional planner with LCPC. And so our energy plan that was adopted in 2018 as well is of course governed by these two state energy goals, one to reduce our overall consumption, and two to of course meet the 90% renewables by 2050. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to highlight some of the goals in our energy plan, our regional energy plan. Some of the themes that the goals are revolved around are, of course, energy conservation and trying to promote a more efficient energy system, as well as continuing to develop renewables. In Lamoille County, we of course, talk about solar, hydro, biomass, geothermal, but we had a lot of discussion around wind in developing our regional energy plan. So our plan actually calls out to support smaller scale wind development, so non-utility scale. And the reason for that is because we have very limited wind resources in Lamoille County, that are not on very fragile scenic ridgelines. So we call that out a little differently in our plan. And of course, a big thing is just trying to locate those generation facilities in areas where we already have built environments and we already have infrastructure to support them. Transportation, fostering, improvements to our public transportation system, we continue to try to work towards that. And yeah, in Lamoille County, we have the rail trail now. So we, one of our big things is, of course, kind of continuing these bike and pedestrian networks. We're really excited to have the extension of the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail, which is supposed to be completed by 2023. So we have the governor and his budget to thank for that. So yeah, that's a big kind of effort that we continue to foster. Some of our actions, are revolved around education and promotion, of course, to municipalities and partners. We promoted a lot of energy efficiency workshops, weatherization workshops, and of course work with the local utilities to promote those incentive programs that they have. You know, whether it be for EVs or you know, or with Efficiency Vermont and all the different, you know, heating programs, incentives that they have. We you know, are working with a lot of communities to develop enhanced energy plans that will align with the state goals. And we're, you know, we have started to explore things like biomass or biogas generation. And of course, public transit, and yeah, continuing to expand on and make kind of connections from those trail networks that exist to our villages, and you know, continue to make those connections to stimulate, you know, economic growth and also provide alternative transportation modes. Next slide, please. So I kind of started to highlight on this a little bit already, but I just wanted to demonstrate some of the progress that we've made since the adoption of our energy plan. We've worked with 7 municipalities to develop enhanced energy plans. We are in the process of starting to work with Cambridge, the town of Cambridge, to develop an enhanced energy plan. So that'll be coming up this year. Recently, you know, I mentioned we've hosted a lot of workshops and really tried to get the word out there about rebates and incentives that are available to people to help make it more affordable. We did do a digester study. So that was kind of looking at you know, the byproduct of local breweries and dairy industries and the possibility of siting a digester in Lamoille County. So that was done with Purpose Energy, I want to say back in 2019. There, you know, it's a good resource, and the study is on our website if folks are interested in checking it out. It did identify some challenges, such as, you know, the level of trucking that would be involved to bring the feedstock to the digester, kind of high annual operating costs, you know, and of course, you know, depending on where it gets sited in the county, you'd have to have utility buy-in and things like that. So there were some challenges associated with it. But, you know, if at some point in time it becomes a more viable solution, it's a good study and resource to have. Mentioned, yeah, bike pedestrian connections. That's going to continue to be an effort of ours that will, you know, try to help foster and assist municipalities with. Next slide. So I wanted to show some of the leak targets just to demonstrate kind of how far we have to come in order to meet our energy targets in Lamoille County. And so I have the weatherization target here, and also the electric heat pumps. So you can see, you know, we have a little bit of ways to go. You know, in Lamoille County, we, you know, certainly in terms of weatherization, I think we're falling a little bit short, you know, of meeting those targets. You know, we have a lot of folks who are eligible for the low-income weatherization programs as well. And I know that there's a very long waiting list. So there's high demand for it. But again, there's that, like Allison said, there's that financial factor, like how do we kind of breach that barrier, that financial barrier. Some challenges, other challenges in relation to the thermal electric sectors. A big one that, you know, we hear about is the grid system capacity, and, you know, the fact that in Lamoille County, and I'll show you on another slide, we really are limited in grid system capacity unless we look at, you know, energy storage and other alternatives. So that, you know, that's definitely a big issue that is addressed in our energy plan. And I mentioned the issue of wind resources, and, you know, we just have very limited wind resources, you know, probably a little more limited than maybe other areas of the state. So we want to make sure that we continue to protect our scenic ridgelines, you know, as we're looking at energy generation moving forward. We already mentioned the cost factor. I'm sure that's going to keep coming up. So cost of heat pumps, you know, most people don't necessarily have the 10 grand it takes to install a heat pump for their house. So, and then one other challenge that we had when we were developing our plan was there were some gaps in our utility mapping data. So as we update our regional plan, which we will be doing soon, you know, hopefully we'll have an opportunity to address some of those gaps possibly. Next slide. Transportation sector. So again, it's kind of some similar challenges here. You know, I'm showing here, I wanted to just show kind of how far we have to come with EV targets. And we have quite a ways to come, but again, you know, things will start to shift as manufacturers solely manufacture EVs. So similar challenges, you know, with the grid system and kind of preparing for this all electric fleet and thinking about those challenges. And then of course the, you know, the financial challenges too, like Allison said, you know, is everybody going to actually have the money to purchase an EV? So, you know, I just kind of reinforce that. You know, I know personally, I couldn't even afford an EV. So yeah, just thinking about those, you know, I personally, I think it's important that even once the manufacturers maybe transition to all electric, we do continue to provide those incentives for people. So I just want to put that plug in there. Another issue or challenge, I would say, with the transportation sector in Lamoille County is, you know, we have people who I think would utilize public transit in a non-pandemic setting, of course, but it's hard to generate enough known demand, you know, and data that actually proves that and shows that we have enough demand to support new public transit routes. Next slide. So this just gets back to the grid system challenge that, you know, a lot of people are talking about. This was pulled from Velco's new long-range transmission plan. And it shows that in Lamoille County, this is for a solar PV example, we only have additional capacity of 25.5 megawatts. So we don't have much additional capacity. Now, I believe this is kind of a scenario where it doesn't necessarily consider energy storage. So keep that in mind. So we have the opportunity to increase our capacity, but we are a little limited. So that's, you know, I just wanted to kind of further demonstrate that, you know, the actual capacity that we have in this scenario is far less than the targets, the regional targets for 2050. Next slide. All right, so opportunities we have in Lamoille County. I'm sure there's, you know, there's many others, but I just wanted to name a few here. You know, we have a real opportunity, you know, for solar. We have a lot of great solar resources in the county, and biomass energy is certainly an opportunity. We already have 27% of households that use wood heat, essentially. So, you know, I'm sure that that's going to be an area that will continue to increase. We have a real opportunity, you know, as Allison already mentioned, to reduce our transportation demand, especially in this kind of post-pandemic world. You know, opportunity to build out that telework and telecommunication capacity, and, you know, continue to, you know, kind of weave that idea into our policies moving forward. And then, you know, again, plug in for the trail networks. You know, we have great trail system here in Lamoille County, and, you know, I'm sure we'll continue to expand it. And it's really a great opportunity. You know, some people even commute on the rail trail, so, which I think is great. You know, and of course, it's just reducing our demands when we're recreating as well, in terms of getting there and so forth. I mentioned this a little earlier, you know, we have this great opportunity to actually locate energy development in preferred sites. So some preferred areas identified in Our energy plans are rooftops, of course, rooftop solar, parking lots. There's a lot of industrial parks, kind of small industrial parks in Lamoille County. So that's really an opportunity to locate renewable energy development near existing infrastructure. And, that way we continue to support our village centers and also preserve our scenic ridgelines. Next slide. All right, so we're going to wrap it up here. So considerations as Public Service Department is updating the Comprehensive Energy Plan. We mentioned the grid system challenge and, Velco's long range transmission plan. I think they really did a great job of identifying some of the challenges in that plan in terms of capacity, energy storage, and grid control. So I would definitely say, try to emphasize that. Another thing to emphasize is protecting the scenic ridgelines again, especially in regards to, wind development. And of course, that could be said for solar too, given the amount of land it uses. But just trying to emphasize that, that was really a big issue in our region. So being able to emphasize that in citing policies and mapping. Of course, continue to advertise the incentive programs and where to find those. And if there's any way to help increase the capacity for the low income weatherization programs, I think that'd be a good area to focus on because there are a lot of folks eligible for those programs. So anyway, we could help increase their capacity and provide resources to them. That's all I have for now. So.
Great. Thanks very much, Megan. Next up is the Northwest Regional Planning Commission and Emily Kloft. I'm going to pass it over to you. So take it away, Emily.
Great, thank you. I'm Emily Kloft. I'm from the Northwest Regional Planning Commission, which represents Franklin and Grand Isle counties. Great. So the Northwest Regional developed a energy plan in 2015-2016. And really this plan has kind of two big goals, which are to decrease total energy demand, primarily through reductions in transportation and heating energy, and then increasing supply of renewable energy by about 240 or so megawatts by 2050. And these were to align with the state goals that we've talked about before. So key strategies that we'll go into more depth later, but were development of about 208 megawatts of solar, so a solar heavy development for renewables, strategic electrification, so the use of electric heat pumps and electric vehicles versus fossil fuel alternatives, weatherization of homes in the region, and a focus on efficient land use to reduce transportation energy demand. I can go to the next slide. So the region has some unique challenges and opportunities. Some of these are probably been echoed as well in the Lamoille and Northeast Kingdom presentations because we have some of the same challenges across the northern tier of the state. I think one that's been referenced a lot tonight is the grid constraints, particularly in the Sheffield-Highgate export interface area, which is roughly in the area circled in red on this map. That's an area where there is just significantly more renewable energy generation than there is demand for energy because it's relatively low population and there's quite a few large energy projects already there. So there's insufficient grid capacity to export it to other areas of the state. And that means that new generation in that area really can't be exported to where it's needed and ends up just costing money, as I think it was referenced in the NEK presentation. A second challenge that will be important for the region is because the region is looking at a solar heavy strategy, and the same is really true of wind, but that solar energy tends to produce energy at certain times and in certain weather. So in the summer more, when it's sunny, in the afternoon, for example, you're going to get a lot more energy than on a cloudy winter day. And this doesn't necessarily line up when most electricity is used. For example, if you're using electricity for heating, you're going to use a lot more probably in the winter to heat your house than you are going to cool your house down in the summer, even if you have AC, since Vermont doesn't get that hot, but it gets pretty cold. So this is a challenge that needs to be addressed. And a third challenge that we have is our proximity to Chittenden County. There's a really big demand for electric energy in Chittenden County, but there's not as much land. In Franklin and Grand Isle counties, there's significantly more land. that could be used for renewable energy generation, but it could put the Northwest region in a challenging spot in deciding whether or not it wants to be an energy exporter to the rest of the state. While there's certainly benefits to that, there can also be downsides. However, there are some regional opportunities as well. Job creation is a big opportunity in the region. Currently, about 2% of the workforce, which is about 500 people in Franklin and Grand Isle, are working in renewable energy. But the biggest center of renewable energy jobs is just to the south in Chittenden County. So there's a good opportunity for more renewable energy jobs to be brought to Franklin and Grand Isle counties. Local utilities and energy groups are also a huge benefit to the region. For example, one of our municipal electric utilities, Swanton Electric, is now 100% renewable. So they're already meeting that 90% goal. And then finally, the proximity to Chittenden County also results in a large number of commuters to Chittenden County. And this actually creates some opportunities for carpooling and public transit opportunities. You can go to the next slide. So now I kind of want to break down a little more kind of sector by sector, starting with thermal energy. So within our regional plan, we identify two strategies, regional energy plan. We identify two strategies to reduce thermal energy use. The first is to increase use of electricity, particularly electric heat pumps for heating. And the second is weatherizing existing homes. So you can see in this graphic, by 2050, essentially almost all heating energy will either come from renewable wood, so cordwood or pellets, or from electricity, with very minimal amounts coming from non-renewable sources. However, we have seen in the region, I think as you've heard from the other regions tonight, that there's been a lag in weatherization and heat pump installation versus goals, and I think that's probably true across the state. I really think there are multiple factors at play here. For folks who have natural gas, electricity can be a more expensive heating source. There can be lack of clarity or insufficient incentives for homeowners around weatherization and home heat pumps, and there's a real lack of availability of incentives for rental housing as well. There's also some concerns over grid reliability. If you don't have a generator, it can be challenging to heat your house with electric if you have frequent power outages, as well as there's generally an older housing stock in the region, so weatherization is a bigger goal. Additionally, there's been some initial research that's been done in the state that's showing that there's an equity problem with current programs where BIPOC and low-income Vermonters are less likely to participate in weatherization, and that holds true even when you look at separately homeowners and renters. So there's clearly a need for additional incentives and programs that are going to help people achieve these goals. I can go to the next slide. So in terms of transportation energy use, our plan focuses a lot on how this has to relate to development in the region. So traditional development in the region for the last couple hundred years was really villages and cities with open space that were forest and farms in between. But over the last 60 years, as Chittenden County has grown as a hub for the economy and jobs in the state, this has really switched with a lot of commuters that are commuting to Chittenden County. That's created auto-oriented development. Well, there's really positive aspects of this, like that the region can provide affordable housing and homes for families. It's also created some negative impacts, both for energy and also for economy, with about $60 million in the region, and this was in 2015, spent on transportation fuel costs, most of which is flowing right out of the region, the state, and even the country. So there's really three strategies that we have identified. And the first is to encourage that compact and walkable development in our historic population centers, by which we mean the existing villages, the city. And in order to do that, one of the things we've highlighted is the need for increased water and sewer infrastructure so that those areas can build up in a safe and healthy way. Additionally, encouraging public transit and bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure where it makes sense. There are two fixed routes going through the region right now, as well as a commuter bus from Burlington to St. Albans and from GMT, but there's really more opportunities for carpooling and public transit going to those major job sites. We have a number of industrial parks in the region, and then we have a large number of residents that are working, in industrial parks further south. And then finally, we recognize as a rural region that there's always going to be a need for vehicles and trucks. So the region is to encourage fuel switching to electric vehicles for personal use and biodiesels for trucks. Electric vehicle technology is really there. It's adoption that can be challenged. Biodiesel technology has been more of a challenge in terms of developing that. for trucks and large equipment. You can go to the next slide. So electrical energy can be a bit complicated to interpret. So while this, in terms of electrical energy demand, well, the strategies we've discussed in these thermal and transportation sections really decrease total energy use, they actually end up increasing electric energy use because they're switching from other sources to electricity. So because of that, regional energy consumption is projected to increase 100% by 2050, double. And so it's really important that we have smart rates, battery storage system, and other solutions that help address this increased demand on the electrical grid. And on the other side, in terms of supply of renewable energy, the plan really looks at a solar-focused model with about 208.5 megawatts of solar, as well as some carefully cited wind and hydro, which we believe would mainly come through improvements to existing sites, as citing new hydro as a challenge. The solar, in order to achieve our solar goal, we calculated out as 1,460 acres of land, which sounds like a lot, and it is, but it also is an achievable goal in terms of space. So we have this graphic here. The large circle, green circle you're seeing is all of the acres of land within the region. You probably can see a slightly smaller green circle. That's all the land that's considered really good for solar and doesn't have known constraints. And then there's a tiny pinprick you might not even be able to see that actually represents 1,460 acres. So in terms of land area, we actually do have enough appropriate land for solar, but the biggest challenge that we have is that grid constraints, which is that a lot of the area that is appropriate for solar is currently facing grid constraints. But DPS, as well as the Public Utility Commission, are looking at solutions, and we're hopeful that there will be some solutions to this issue. We can go to the next slide. So I wanted to show as well one of the main features of our energy plan, which is that it includes these recommended siting maps. So this is the siting map for solar, which you can see in a zoomed out detail here, that roughly these areas that are green represent base solar, which is essentially areas where it's been established, it's good for solar, it has the right lighting, it's going to be effective, but there's known constraints. So it might be that it's in the middle of your village. It might be that it's in an area with really good agricultural soils that we want to preserve as farmland, or in an area that is a really important scenic or natural resource. And yellow represents the area that is prime solar. So it's the areas that are good for solar where we haven't identified any of those regional constraints. So as you can see in this map, this really illustrates some of the challenges we're having with grid constraints, where much of the area that is this yellow color showed as prime solar is located within that area of grid constraints, and siting new generation is challenging. And so I think, echoing what some of the other RPCs have said, we believe that battery storage, smart grid technology to increase midday electricity demand, and grid upgrades are all really important considerations to look at how to increase capacity so we can reach these goals. I can go to the next slide. So just wrapping up here, it's kind of what I see as three main takeaways from our region, which is first that addressing grid constraints is really crucial to ensuring that renewable energy supply. And the second is in terms of decreasing demand, looking at it really relies heavily on individual and consumer choices, and that's really crucial to success, which is why we recognize that we really want to do a lot of additional engagement with the community, and hope that this presentation is the start of points of greater conversation. And then finally, that the regional energy goals are ambitious, and they're definitely going to require coordination from a variety of stakeholders at the state, regional, and local level, along with coordination with the Climate Council report that's upcoming. You can go to the next slide quickly. So as I'm wrapping up here, I just wanted to provide my contact information, as well as a link to our website where you can find this energy planning page with information on energy planning and the regional energy plan. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Emily. So next slide, please. Actually, why don't you go back to that slide, Edward, for just a moment, so people can get Emily's contact information. And in a moment, we're going to ask for questions that you have, informational questions to the three presenters. So if you have a question, please enter it in chat or raise your hand. Okay. So we'll give it a couple minutes for people to type in stuff. And after we answer informational questions, we'll give an opportunity for people representing municipalities, select boards, planning commissions, and energy committees. There may be a few city councilors or perhaps a mayor in here. You will be looking for your input on the questions that we raised before. But first off, any questions that you have for the presenters?
So here's a question from,
Yep.
I think it's from Jock Gill in Peacham. What about vehicle to grid systems such as the proposed F-150 that's coming next year? And he notes it's batteries on wheels.
And do other people understand that question better than I? What about the vehicle to grid?
It's really a question of storage. I mean, solar without storage is not nearly as interesting as solar with storage. So that we need to find ways that people can have battery storage without having to buy or lease power walls, et cetera, in their homes. And you know, it's Green Mountain Power has done a lot of work with batteries in terms of avoiding peak power and in terms of stabilizing synchrony in the grid. So the batteries on wheels are going to become a major asset that can be dual purpose: one, transportation, and two, grid strengthening and home security for power outages.
Great, thanks for the comment.
Yep.
Does anybody want to respond to that before we move on to other comments from folks representing municipalities? So next slide, please.
Right. Cindy, I can just respond to that a little bit also, and
great, thanks.
just in the broader context of the energy plan. And thank you for that comment. And I think it goes to, we want to make sure that the energy plan is preparing the state to be nimble when these opportunities arise, and to ensure we're setting up a structure where we're evaluating storage and setting up the infrastructure, making sure that you know, rules are set up to ensure reliability, but also to allow kind of interoperability of all different resources. And so it kind of gets to what I was saying earlier in the process of we want to just make sure that we're hearing all these suggestions, and we're setting up the grid in a way, setting up our energy policy in a way that can react. Right now, you know, vehicle to grid has been talked about for a long time, right? It seems closer than ever to actually being a possibility. There's more pilots around the country, and even in southern Vermont, I think we're initiating a pilot on with electric school buses, and also having them be a vehicle to grid resource. So you know, to the extent in this conversation, if as the, you know, RPCs or the municipalities, as we go forward in the next hour, you know, can think about kind of that kind of question in the context of how can the state's energy plan best help you to prepare for and be nimble in your energy planning as you go forward. So hopefully that was helpful.
Great. So thanks, TJ. And TJ just articulated the first of three questions that the department is particularly interested in, but I think they're interested in any input that will help guide them as they're drafting the comprehensive energy plan. So first is, how can the plan support municipal energy planning? How can the standards and recommendations be improved? And what recommendations from municipal and local plans should the department be actively considering as it updates the comprehensive energy plan? So are there people that want to respond to those questions, or any or all of them? If so, please enter something in chat or raise your hand.
So this is Philip, and if he doesn't mind, I'll read Jason's comment, which is it returns to storage. So it's not directly municipal related, but storage duration is an important factor. Current battery technology is limited in duration to around a day. Solar in the winter can easily go a week with little to no power generation due to cloudy weather. And we need more robust transmission infrastructure to scale solar and more grid flexibility, as was mentioned in the vehicle to grid topic. And on the municipal aspect, I'm going to also share a comment, which I mentioned earlier. This is from Jock, who's the chair of the Peacham Energy Committee. And he was addressing promoting community solar and reducing those barriers to building more community solar projects.
Yeah, I can respond to that first and allow others from the department or any of our other planners on the call to respond. And again, I think with community solar, I think there's well, I'll reference folks first back to, and in case folks don't know, the Department of Public Service publishes an annual energy report every year. And in last year's energy report, we also did kind of a deep dive on net metering. And right now, net metering is kind of the main mechanism to support, that has been used to support community solar on a statewide basis. Now, Vermont Electric Co-op, which covers a bunch of the regional planning commissions here, also has had a community solar program. And there's been other efforts going forward. And I think this gets really to the question of how we balance our objectives. And community solar, depending on how you structure it, could be really intended to support low income solar. The Department of Public Service just well, it's not signed, but in the budget bill, there's funds to support a community solar program targeted to low income, to try and get more lower income folks who are otherwise unable to participate in net metering to join in being able to have solar, participate in solar. And so I think there's a pilot going on there, but we also just really need to evaluate that against net metering, against other options we have to really meet our state's energy targets, and whether it is all solar, or we still have an open question of should it be local or should it be regional, our renewable energy power, and that's a question we need input on, and we need to understand the benefits and costs for it being local versus getting our energy imported from elsewhere. So that probably isn't a direct answer to that question, but it hopefully provides a little more context and color.
So are there do other people have questions, comments? I noted earlier that several presenters mentioned grid capacity. Is there a conversation that you want to have about that? And planning for future grid capacity?
Are you looking for comment from me, Cindy, or
I'm looking for questions from the participants that might help you with your planning for developing the plan. What else is of particular interest to you? I know those on the call are very committed to these issues. Are there things that you are particularly you really want to underscore for the department as they are moving forward on this plan development? So we've got some new messages. Philip, can you help with that?
Sure. So I'm going to maybe read the second one first and then return to Fran. So Jock is, speaking of his hometown, Peacham, and just noting that there's very serious limits on 3-phase power there. And so grid upgrades can help address that. And Fran asks, is there a requirement that a certain amount of energy be generated locally?
So locally, as in Vermont, there's requirements of utilities to purchase a certain amount of renewable energy from plants, renewable energy plants that have been built in Vermont since 2015. As part of the renewable energy standard. Our standard is increasing percentage of renewables from anywhere in the region up to 75% by 2032, but then a portion of that, or a tranche of that, is required to be from sources in Vermont. But I don't believe, and somebody could feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no other kind of further localized requirement.
And maybe if I could just add on, the last Comprehensive Energy Plan looked at a scenario where we potentially met 50% of our renewable generation needs in state. It was a scenario that was reviewed, and we're definitely trying to figure out what the scenarios are we should be looking at in this Comprehensive Energy Plan, and that'll be part of the modeling work that's going to happen throughout the summer, and we're going to be looking for folks for input on that. But at the time, that was in 2016, and then many of these regional plans happened soon thereafter. So they looked at a scenario as well of what if they met 50% of their generation needs within the region. And so that started many of the targets that you see the regions putting up from their on their slides are based on looking at potentially a 50% in region, sort of taking their per capita share within their region of the entire state, 50%. And I think that really led to the conversation about this grid capacity question. And many of the regions have been looking and working with, or hearing from Velco, the state's transmission operator, who really kind of laid out in their recent draft long-range transmission plan, which if folks haven't taken a look at, really should, seeing what can the transmission system accommodate in terms of if we continue to deploy solar in the historic kind of deployment patterns geographically. And that's where you're seeing this tension between, well, our goal is 200 megawatts, but really the transmission system can only accommodate another 25 megawatts, something like that. So that's a real tension that we're working through right now. And we'd love to hear from the regions on, you know, if the deployment, it goes beyond what sort of Velco has laid out, there will be potentially hundreds of millions of dollars of costs to upgrade the transmission system. All of those costs are going to be borne by Vermont ratepayers. When you add to the costs on people's electric bills and you add to their electric costs, then there is a disincentive to do the beneficial electrification in the heating and transportation sectors that we need to happen. You don't want to raise the price of that good. So I think that sort of attention is, do we look to increase the, grow the capacity in the transmission and distribution system to accommodate more renewables locally and potentially add to our electric costs for consumers that disincentivize that electrification? Or do we kind of look to really lean in on that beneficial electrification and sort of make the best use of the grid that we already have with flexible loads, storage, locational and time pricing signals, that kind of thing? So that probably went a little deeper than people wanted to, but that's really where we're struggling, not struggling, but it's a conversation we're having. We'd love to have with folks here to talk about the best path forward that meets everybody's needs.
Great, thanks, Ann. And Philip, since you're more conversant in these issues than I, can you describe the comments that have been coming in?
Sure. So the latest comment is Andrea Cohen from Vermont Electric Cooperative posted a link to VEC's map of constraints when it comes to interconnections. So that's for the VEC territory, and Green Mountain Power for their territory also has a similar map on GMP's website.
And that link is in the chat function if people are interested. Andrea,
Yes.
Is there anything else you want to add about that? I think you're muted.
Hi, yeah, I'm just hanging back. I figure I'll just throw some links for you all. I'm not prepared to really present anything except for to share
Certainly.
that, it's a challenging issue, and like many things, it comes down to cost, right? Um, if we're satisfying our renewable energy goals, and our board of directors just committed to 100% renewable by 2030 and 100% carbon-free power supply in 2 years. So, we feel like we're doing a pretty good job on behalf of our members, getting clean, good renewable energy and carbon-free energy. But so if there's an interest in upgrading the system to accommodate more, what ends up happening for us is it's a money thing, right? And as the other folks mentioned before, these are some of the highest energy burden already in the state. So, anything that might translate into rates, we're really sensitive about. So we have to have a good reason, for spending money on things. So interesting topic that we'll be all struggling with in the years ahead, like what's fair, what's equitable, what's a good use of limited dollars. Right now our goal is really focused on carbon reduction more than anything. So that's kind of where we're putting, our priority.
Thanks. And back over to you, Philip.
Okay, so Jock has offered this comment in regards to the cost of solar and solar net metering. He says, I make a kilowatt hour for 11 cents. Why would I want to pay 20 cents to purchase a kilowatt hour? And he just notes that in the future, there will be real market pressure coming, market pressure to let folks benefit from lower cost, locally generated energy.
Okay, so there hasn't been much discussion about support that municipalities and regions would like to see set forth in the comprehensive energy plan. Does anybody have comments about that? Of additional support that you need for planning? And I'll wait a minute for people to type in comments. Somebody's raised their hand. Emily.
Yeah, I figured I would just talk a little bit kind of on a separate topic that hasn't been discussed that much in terms of planning, is really getting data that is at the municipal level has been a challenge for us. Like heating data mostly comes from American Community Survey, which gets pretty inaccurate in small communities. And as well, some of the electric energy data we have and EV data is based on zip code, which don't really correlate very well to our municipal boundaries. So that is certainly an area of support that we've identified in terms of planning.
Thanks, Emily. Other folks have comments about support for planning?
Irene from NVDA in the Kingdom also seconded that notion and says data is a priority.
And the more specific you can be about what kind of data you're looking for, I think would be helpful to the department. That doesn't necessarily need to be now, but during the course of the comments for the comprehensive energy plan.
Yeah, I'll just
go ahead.
I'll just also, thanks, Cindy. I'll just comment that we're recognizing that as we start to talk with Stockholm Energy Institute and developing the LEAP model, and just even the statewide data is a little challenging to parse out on the thermal sector. We should have good electric data, and we could talk more about that. And it has been a challenge. And I guess one thing I'll also note is, and this is, I know we're talking about the energy plan here, but because we're coordinating closely with the climate action plan, is that there's a science and data subcommittee of that plan that's really trying to clearly identify where the data gaps are. And one of those that has been identified is more local data. And not necessarily today, but to the extent we can articulate how it will be used, it gives more weight to actually the need for it and then the actions that could be taken, whether it's imposing reporting requirements on somebody, or if it's something much easier than that, or providing incentives for reporting, or carrot or the stick, whichever way we go. But so there are going to be recommendations coming out of that as well that we're look to pursue. I don't want to oversell anything that it's, we're probably not going to collect new data in the next 3 months for, in the thermal sector, that will be very enlightening, but we may be able to put in place processes to get to that data in the near future. So thank you for that comment, Emily. I think it's right on.
Do other people have comments about data needs?
This is Megan. I just noted in our region, we just in some cases we had some gaps in the utility data, in terms of like the 3-phase power lines data. So we're hoping, like I said, hoping to maybe address some of those gaps when we update our regional energy chapter again. We'll be updating our regional plan over the next year. But that was just another area where there are some gaps.
Thanks, Megan.
I wasn't able to raise my hand. In addition to that, I think it would be helpful if we were able to build some scenarios that could find a way, or at least to demonstrate to municipalities how beneficial electrification and storage might alleviate some grid congestion in some of the more constrained areas. I know that we have targets for fuel switching in transportation, for example, but we don't really have an analysis on what it does to load.
So what you're saying is you'd like to have information that's in an accessible format that you could provide to towns
Yes.
on that subject. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody else have comments on that, department or other participants?
Yeah, thank you. I noted that when you mentioned that earlier, we should have some estimates, and the modeling can help, although I think we'll need to, it'll be once we narrow the focus, but on the amount of load from an EV, for an example, and what impact that will have on the grid. And then it should be simple math to get to, okay, well, if you have X number of EVs, then that alleviates the constraint. The part that's not simple is the timing of when that load will show up, and we have to make sure it's at the right time. And I think hopefully we can get there with the modeling. I think that's having that in the plan, or having accessibility to modeling that can help you figure that out will be it's a good point that I've noted. Thank you.
I think another piece of that comment, I think, was that providing information in a format that's accessible to people, the lay people that are serving on energy committees and just planners in towns could be helpful. And I'm wondering if there are other arenas where that kind of information, that public outreach information to help with education would be useful. I'll pause here to give people a chance to raise their hands or type in chat comments, questions. and while we're waiting for another minute or so, I just want to put it to both the department and all the other participants. If you have questions of one another or areas that you want to have a conversation that we haven't yet had today, be thinking about that and type that into chat or raise your hand as well.
This is Megan again from LCPC. I just want to say, you asked about the impacts on the grid system and kind of wrapping that into the analysis in terms of providing examples. And, in terms of educational outreach, I just think that would help people understand the challenge of the grid system in general, and as various committees at the local level start to, look at their energy plans again. I just want to kind of resonate the fact that I think that would be helpful.
Great, thanks. And Philip, can I turn to you there's some comments that have come through on chat.
Sure. So I didn't want to miss Fran pointing out the capacity or need for capacity for small towns to engage in the planning process. And then Jock offered a question, two questions. First, asking about energy education in the K-12 sphere and STEAM programs, and the need to educate our young people for their energy future. And to that, I can respond, make sure they knows about VEEP, the Vermont Energy Education Program, which works with K-12 students and also provides materials for teachers addressing energy efficiency and renewables and climate change. That's, I think, veep.org, or VEEP they call it. And then his second point is, this is again in Peacham, we are looking at zoning that requires at least pretty good house standards, at least going forward for new construction. And he asks about incentives for that. And if he wants to either unmute himself, maybe he can explain the meaning of pretty good house and those standards.
Okay. Pretty Good House is a standard. It's now Pretty Good House 2.0, I believe. You can Google it. It was developed initially in Maine. It's being explored by some developers up in the North Country. It's a standard that says you build a house that is not LEED standard, not gold standard, not platinum standard, but it's cost effective in creating spaces that are easier to heat, easier to cool, and use less energy. I mean, we're looking at cluster housing in Peacham, in order to have efficiencies of transportation, efficiencies in water, sewage, and energy. But we want to make sure that new construction is forward-looking in terms of its use of energy. And Pretty Good House Standard 2.0 is you can do it with existing tools and existing knowledge. You just have to, be careful about certain things. But I recommend anybody interested in this, just Google Pretty Good House 2.0. Thank you.
So does the department have a response or?
Yeah, thanks, Cindy. I'll just note that I appreciate that comment. Right now, the energy plan isn't the only thing that we have going on. We actually have initiated what we're calling a code collaborative, which is a kind of collaborative stakeholder process to get input on how to get to net energy zero design by 2030 and advance our residential, advance both of our building energy codes, residential and commercial. And that also there's, when we adopt our energy standards, which will be beginning that process in the fall of readopting once they're based on an International Energy Conservation Code, and that is going to be updated this summer. Then we start our process. We also adopt a stretch code in the residential sector, and I'm not, I don't know if any of our code experts are on the line actually, but so I'm not sure how the Pretty Good House compares to the stretch code. But municipalities can adopt those stretch codes with new construction within their footprint. I guess I'll stop there. And you want more information, can reach out offline. We can move forward there.
So I see that Emily has her hand raised.
Yeah, I thank you for bringing up the pretty good house standards. That's interesting. I haven't heard those before. I now want to look them up. But yeah, I kind of wanted to address that. It was one of the things that was addressed within our regional energy plan, as well as a challenge that I didn't bring up in our presentation, but is the residential building energy standards, and identified as it's been a challenge in terms of enforcement of those standards across the region. They are being shared with everyone building a new home, but there's no real enforcement mechanism for that for a lot of our small communities. And so that's been a challenge, as well as I think we've encouraged municipalities to look at the stretch code. But there's been, I think, some fear with the stretch code and how that will impact housing affordability, and if that would reduce the ability of people to have affordable homes. Of course, it also makes it more affordable to heat and cool your home. So there are trade-offs there in intention that I think are recognized within our plan.
Great, thanks, Emily. Is there anything else on building codes before I change the subject slightly? Or, so I want to go back to Fran's chat comment. She noted the need for increased capacity for towns to engage in the planning process. And Fran, I'm wondering if you could speak to what types of capacity you're talking about in terms of what would be helpful to you in your town to increase your capacity for planning.
Sure. Sorry. I'm not here like representing the Belvedere Planning Commission, but I'm a member of the Belvedere Planning Commission, and recognize that as we're finishing up our municipal plan, our town plan, all of us are sort of at capacity with this project, and we didn't put in an enhanced energy plan. We did redo our energy section, but I sort of feel like we missed an opportunity because we were feeling as a group like we didn't have the capacity, we didn't have the know-how, and maybe we also didn't have enough buy-in from other members of the committee. And the LCPC has been incredibly helpful to us. But I'm just recognizing that in our tiny town, where so many of our members are involved in the town, and there's sort of limited people, so we all have lots of roles and we're putting in lots of volunteer hours, that I just think that we have limitations there as a town with a population of 400 people, to have enough buy-in from our community, or enough people that are available to participate in something as complicated as this process.
Thanks, Fran. Do other folks from the towns or regions have thoughts on what the comprehensive energy plan could include that would help with providing more support for the town planning process? Besides more bodies in Belvedere. I'll give a moment for people to raise their hands or enter things in chat. And as we're waiting here, I just want to ask if there's anybody who wanted to make a formal comment during the public comment period. I think most of the participants have been active right along, but if you have been wanting to make a public comment, please raise your hand or note so that you want to do so in chat. And if we'll continue this conversation to the extent that people want to do that. Let's see.
Andy, I see Mr. Freed has his hand up.
Okay. So, and
have I been recognized?
You have, yes.
Okay, I'm Kim Freed from Newark, Vermont. I think one of the most important things that can be done by the in any of the energy plan is that the state, whether it's a 174 council or the Public Utility Commission, that the town plans and regional plans are recognized and supported. And we've had experiences in the past where, although our plans met the regional and state requirements, once the lawyers get involved, we don't see the support from the state and agencies within the state. And that's discouraging. It has a rippling effect. We have the same problem trying to boost our membership and spread the word. And a lot of it is because lack of support. And along with the lack of support, the moving target that our state legislature and departments, when we're in the middle of planning, suddenly the rules to the game change. And we have to go back and revise our plan if we want to keep it current. And then there's, even with town support and regional support, there's a strong feeling that we don't have state support. And anyway, that's a comment. I do have another comment. On the previous slide, you asked what can be done to better support the community's town plans. Your first comment, what is most important? From my perspective, and I think many planners, their respective, is that we need state support. We do thousands of hours worth of work, most of it volunteer. The town has to put lots of money forward for special meetings and special votes, and then to find the state not to support it or to keep moving the target. And in some cases, target not appearing to be achievable is very discouraging. And I think that the Act 174 Council and the Comprehensive Energy Plan shouldn't put themselves in a position where they don't support the people who are doing the work at the town and regional level.
Great. Thank you for your comment.
And my first name is Kim. Nancy's my wife. I'm using her computer because our connections up here are limited.
I understand. Thank you, Kim. Are there other comments? How are we doing on the queue, Philip?
There's
Any
a
topics? Go ahead.
I was
Sorry.
gonna say there's a follow-up. I don't need to read it, but it's from my colleague in the Public Service Department, just explaining the residential building energy code in reference to the Pretty Good House discussion.
Great. Are there topics that people feel are important to include in the comprehensive energy plan that we've not yet spoken of that you'd like to raise now? So otherwise I give people another chance to raise their hand if they want to make a comment. But we're getting close to wrapping up. So if you want to comment, please raise your hand or chat, mention something in chat now, and I'll give you another moment or two, and then we'll shift to see if there are other topics that people would like to raise or questions that you have for the department or the regions before we close up. So we'll give a minute or two here. So I'm not hearing anything. TJ, could you run through the additional opportunities for involvement? And just let me add before you start that there's a new button on the website so that people who are not yet on the distribution list for this process can go to the department's website and click that button, and you'll get information about future events related to the plan development process. So now I'm going to pass it over to you, TJ, to wrap it up.
Great, thank you. And thank you everybody for the conversation. It's all really helpful to talk to those of you who are on the ground trying to plan in furthering the energy plan and the last one, and then in the context of the development of the new one. And so thank you all. And so additional opportunities here. Cindy mentioned our website. The link is here. This gets updated pretty regularly with additional opportunities. Not on there yet because I think the date is a little uncertain. For example, we're going to join a webinar that's hosted by BNRC to talk about the energy plan and the climate action plan, and a little bit of what you heard earlier from me, but then more conversation, more opportunity to provide input there. You can send an email to the address listed here, and we're reviewing those throughout the process. We review all the feedback we get, and we'll be synthesizing that in a report on the stakeholder process and the engagement we received and comments we received. And then of course you can do it the old-fashioned way via mail directly to our office. And I think at least some of us, some of the time, will be heading back to the office sometime soon. How's that for non-committal? But in terms of going to the office, but we'll be able to pick up your mail and review it and include it. So just in closing, I think that's it for the slides, if I'm not mistaken, Cindy. And thank you all again. This is an iterative process for us. We go into this, the slides earlier said we have a starting point, and we really need all this type of input from RPCs, from municipalities, and from the public in order to inform how we make those policy trade-offs and how we frame our energy decisions going forward. So very, very much appreciated your participation today. And please reach out if there's more comments and more thoughts you have.